Omega had burned from saving a child in fire, unaware the child was Alpha King Heir. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sarah Whitlock had never expected to be a hero. In fact, she had spent most of her life quietly living in the shadow of her pack's rejection, where the word Omega was a label heavy with disdain. As an Omega, she had always been the lowest tier in a world dominated by powerful alphas. But none of that mattered when she heard the cry of a child from inside the burning house. The flames had spread quickly, devouring the wooden structure in seconds, and the smoke filled the air like a thick, choking blanket. People were running, but Sarah could only think of the child trapped inside. Her heart pounded in her chest as she forced herself to move, ignoring the heat that scorched her skin. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Her instincts kicked in, and without a second thought, she ran into the fire. The world around her was a blur of smoke and heat. Her lungs burned as she gasped for air, but Sarah kept pushing forward, following the sound of the child's cries. She reached the small room where the child was curled up, too terrified to move. Sarah didn't hesitate. She scooped the child into her arms, feeling the small body tremble against her chest. The pain in her body was a distant thought. All that mattered was getting the child out. As she turned to leave, the roof creaked ominously, and a beam crashed down near her, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The flames reached higher, licking at the edges of her clothes, but Sarah didn't stop. She pushed forward, her feet barely touching the ground as she carried the child to safety. Once outside, she collapsed to the ground, the child still in her arms, her body shaking with exhaustion. Her skin was burned, her body aching, but she had saved the child. She had done something good for once, and it made her feel like more than just the Omega she had always been. But as she looked down at the child she had saved, she noticed something strange. There was a strange, almost otherworldly quality to the child's gaze, something deep and knowing, far beyond the innocence of a normal child. The child was still trembling in her arms, but their eyes locked with hers, and Sarah felt a strange sensation stir inside her. She couldn't place it, but it was as if the child recognized her in a way she couldn't understand. She heard a voice behind her, but it didn't belong to anyone she knew. It was a deep, commanding voice that made her skin prickle. "She is the one," the voice said, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She turned to see a tall figure standing at the edge of the crowd. The man was unlike anyone she had ever seen. His gaze was intense, and his presence was undeniable. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the child in Sarah's arms. "Is this the child who was saved?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. Sarah, still dazed and exhausted, could barely nod. But the man's gaze never left her. "You did not just save a child. You saved the future of the throne." Sarah's mind raced. She had saved a child, yes, but she had no idea who this man was or what he meant by the throne. She looked down at the child, now calm in her arms, and then back at the man. Who is this child?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man's eyes softened just for a moment. "This child is the heir to the Alpha King's throne, and you, Sarah Whitlock, are now bound to him in a way that you could never have imagined." Sarah still held the child in her arms, her body sore and her mind reeling from the revelation. The crowd had slowly begun to disperse, their whispers hanging in the air like smoke. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted the child's weight, the heat from the flames still lingering in her skin. But it wasn't just the burns that made her feel overwhelmed. It was the weight of the man's words, the gravity of what had just been said. The heir to the Alpha King's throne. The words echoed in her mind. She had saved a child, yes, but a child who was destined to rule, to carry the legacy of a kingdom. She looked at the man who had spoken, his presence undeniable. He was tall, his form powerful and commanding, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. His eyes, sharp and calculating, never left her. Sarah could feel her heart racing, her breath shallow. The Alpha King's heir. What did that mean for her? What did that mean for the future? The man stepped closer, his every movement measured, purposeful. You've done more than just save a life today, Sarah Whitlock, he said, his voice deep, his tone laden with something she couldn't place. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something in his gaze made her stay silent. You've awakened something, he continued, his words hanging in the air like a promise or a warning. The bond between you and the heir is not just one of savior and saved. It is deeper than that. Sarah's mind raced, but she couldn't find the words to speak. The world seemed to tilt, as if everything she had known and believed about herself had been shattered in an instant. She was just an Omega, someone who had never been good enough for her own pack. And now, she was bound to the Alpha King's heir? It seemed impossible. The man before her, the one who had been standing like a shadow in the background, finally stepped into the light. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something softer there, a flicker of understanding. I know this is a lot to process, he said, his voice gentler now. But you must understand, the path you're on is one that no Omega before you has ever walked. The heir is not just any child. He is the future of this kingdom, and he is bound to you in ways neither of you can yet understand. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. How could she? She was no one, a broken Omega, and yet here she was, at the center of something far bigger than herself. What do you want from me? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. The man's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, before he responded. I want you to trust that what you've done today was no accident. The moon has chosen you for this. And now, you must choose whether you will accept what has been given to you. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. She didn't understand. She didn't know if she could accept this destiny that had been thrust upon her. But I'm just an Omega, she whispered, almost to herself. I don't belong in this world. The man's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You belong because you have shown kindness, strength, and the heart of a ruler. The moon does not choose weak souls, Sarah. You have more power within you than you know. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt a flicker of something that was not fear or doubt, but something stronger. Something that made her feel as though, just maybe, she wasn't as insignificant as she had always believed. She looked down at the child in her arms, his small body still trembling, but his eyes calm, almost as if he knew something she didn't. And for a moment, Sarah believed him. She believed that somehow, she had been chosen for something greater. The man watched her, his gaze never leaving her face, waiting for her response. Sarah closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her decision. I will do whatever it takes, she said, her voice steady. For him, for the kingdom, for all of us. The man nodded, a small smile flickering at the corners of his lips. Then it's time for you to meet your future, Sarah Whitlock. The Alpha King's heir has found his mate, and the future of the kingdom begins now. The air in the room was heavy with anticipation as Sarah stood, her heart racing. She had agreed. She had chosen to accept a fate that was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Now, standing before the man who had delivered her to this point, she felt both fear and excitement stir within her. The Alpha King's heir, the future of a kingdom, was now bound to her in a way she could not yet fully understand. The man, still towering with his commanding presence, turned to her with a nod. Follow me, he said, his voice steady, giving nothing away. As he led her through the crowd, Sarah felt the eyes of the onlookers burn into her. They were curious, some of them with suspicion, others with awe, but none of them would understand what had just transpired. She was no longer just an Omega, no longer the broken girl who had been rejected by her own pack. She was something more now, something tied to the future of the kingdom, something that only a few could comprehend. As they walked through the winding corridors of the castle, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision settling upon her shoulders. She had no idea what the future held, but she was ready to face it. She had to be. Her thoughts were interrupted as they reached a large chamber, its doors adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell the story of the kingdom's past. The Alpha King's heir stood before them, a figure who, until now, had been nothing more than a distant idea, a whispered legend. He was still a child, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of power, of authority far beyond his years. The man who had guided her through the castle stepped aside, allowing Sarah to approach the child. This is the heir, he said softly. And this is where it all begins. Sarah looked down at the child in her arms, her heart swelling with an overwhelming mixture of emotions. She had saved him, and now, her destiny was intertwined with his. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to feel, but she knew one thing. She couldn't walk away from this. She had chosen to stay, to be a part of this world. The heir to the throne looked up at her, his eyes filled with a knowing that Sarah couldn't quite place. There was something ancient in his gaze, something that spoke of a deep connection between them, something she couldn't fully comprehend. "You saved me," the child said, his voice soft, yet carrying a weight that surprised Sarah. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I did," she said simply, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The child smiled, a small, knowing smile that seemed to carry the wisdom of the ages. "You are more than just my savior," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "You are my mate, Sarah Whitlock. The moon has chosen you, just as it chose me." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. She wasn't just part of this world by chance. She was destined for something greater, something that could change everything. I don't understand," she whispered, feeling a lump form in her throat. The man beside her spoke again, his voice soft but firm. "The bond between you and the heir is not just one of fate. It is one of power. You will help guide him, protect him, and together, you will lead the kingdom into a new era." Sarah's world tilted, her mind racing to keep up with the whirlwind of emotions and revelations. She had been chosen, but for what? What would her role be in all of this? She had no answers, only questions. But deep down, she knew one thing. This was her new reality. There was no turning back now. The child, the heir, stepped forward, his small hand reaching out to her. "Together," he said, his voice carrying a promise that Sarah could feel in her bones. "We will change the world." And in that moment, Sarah Whitlock, the broken Omega, understood that she had found her place in a world that had once seemed so vast and so unreachable. She was not just a part of the story. She was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would change everything. For her, for the heir, and for the kingdom. The journey had only just begun. Sarah stood in the grand hall, her heart pounding with anticipation as she faced the heir to the Alpha King's throne. The weight of her new reality was still settling in, and every step she took seemed to echo in the cavernous space, amplifying the uncertainty in her chest. She was no longer the girl who had been cast aside by her pack. No, she had crossed a threshold, one that led her into the heart of a kingdom she could never have imagined. The heir, still a child but with eyes that seemed far older, looked up at her. There was a calmness in his gaze, a certainty that Sarah had yet to find within herself. He was, after all, destined for greatness, and somehow, that greatness was now tied to her. "You're here," he said, his voice soft but steady, carrying the weight of something deeper. "We have much to learn, both of us. But together, we will change the future." His words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine, though she didn't fully understand their meaning yet. She had only just agreed to this bond, and already, she felt the pull between them. It was as if the moon had woven them together in a way that transcended reason or explanation. The Alpha King's heir was not just a child, but a future king, and Sarah's presence by his side was no accident. They were bound by something ancient, something that ran deeper than the blood in their veins. As she looked at the heir, her thoughts were interrupted by a figure approaching from the shadows. The man who had first brought her into the castle, the one who had spoken of her destiny, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You've made the right choice," he said, his voice low and respectful. "But understand this, your path will not be easy. You will face opposition, doubts, and challenges, but you must stay true to the bond. The future depends on it." Sarah nodded, though she could feel the weight of his words sinking into her bones. What had she truly agreed to? What did it mean to be bound to the Alpha King's heir? She wasn't sure yet, but one thing was clear. She couldn't back down. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back now. As she stood there, her eyes met the heir's once more. He smiled, a small, knowing smile, as though he could read her thoughts. "We are stronger together," he said, as if offering reassurance. "And we will face everything that comes our way. Together." Those words, simple yet profound, settled in Sarah's heart. She had no idea what the future held, but in this moment, standing beside the heir to the throne, she felt something shift within her. A spark of hope, of purpose, that she had never known before. She was no longer the Omega who had been cast aside. She was Sarah Whitlock, a part of something greater, a force that would shape the future of the kingdom. And with that realization, she knew one thing for certain. She would never be the same again. The days that followed were filled with a whirlwind of emotions and uncertainty. Sarah had barely begun to grasp the magnitude of her new life when the reality of her situation started to settle in. The heir, still a child in many ways, was becoming more than just someone she had saved. He was the future, the key to the kingdom, and she was now tied to him in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The castle, once a place that had felt distant and cold, now felt like a new world she had to navigate. She spent her days in the halls, learning the customs, the politics, and the intricate dynamics of court life. But all of it felt like a blur. The weight of the heir's future hung over her every step, and with it, a new understanding of the responsibilities she had accepted. The heir's presence was always close, his eyes ever watchful, and though he was young, there was a wisdom in him that unsettled her. They would share meals, discuss matters that were beyond her understanding, and slowly, Sarah began to see the power that resided in him. He was not just a child, but a force, one that could change the course of everything. Despite her growing connection to him, Sarah found herself struggling with doubts. She had always been an outsider, someone who had never truly belonged, and now, as she stood beside the heir, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still unworthy of such a position. "You're the mate of the heir," the man who had first brought her into the castle, Lord Aurican, reminded her one afternoon. His words were sharp, but there was a hint of something softer in his voice. "You have a role to play, Sarah Whitlock, and you must rise to it." Sarah nodded, though she couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. What did it mean to be the mate of a future king? How could she, an Omega, someone who had always been on the fringe of society, fulfill such a monumental role? That night, as she sat alone in her chambers, Sarah found herself staring out at the moonlit sky, her thoughts a tangle of questions. She had saved the heir, yes, but was she truly ready for the life that awaited her? Could she live up to the expectations that had been thrust upon her? The soft sound of footsteps behind her broke her from her thoughts, and she turned to see the heir standing in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the light. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. "Are you well?" The child's eyes, always filled with a quiet understanding, seemed to pierce through her doubts. "I am," she replied, though she wasn't sure if she truly believed it. "But there's so much I don't understand." The heir walked toward her, his small hand reaching out to gently rest on hers. "We will learn together," he said, his voice steady. "We are not alone in this. We are bound by fate, and that means we will face whatever comes next, together." For a moment, Sarah simply stared at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and fear. He was right. They were bound by something greater than either of them could have known. The moon, the stars, the kingdom, it had all led her here, to this moment, to this child who would one day be the ruler of it all. And though she still felt unworthy, she knew that this bond, this connection, was not something she could easily walk away from. She had made her choice. She had chosen to stand by the heir, to be a part of something greater than herself. And with that choice came the responsibility to rise above her doubts, to be the strength he needed, just as he would be the strength she needed. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and together, they would shape the future of the kingdom. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her bones. There was no turning back now. She was more than just an Omega. She was Sarah Whitlock, and she had a purpose. She would stand by the heir, and together, they would change everything. The days that followed Sarah's decision were filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The castle had become both her sanctuary and a reminder of the life she had chosen, a life bound to the Alpha King's heir. She spent countless hours with the child, learning what she could about the kingdom, its politics, and the intricate nature of the power that flowed through its bloodlines. But despite her growing understanding, A lingering unease settled in her chest. She had come to this place to serve, to protect, and yet, there was still so much she didn't know. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Sarah found herself standing on the balcony, gazing out over the vast lands that stretched beyond the castle walls. The cool breeze tousled her hair, but her mind remained troubled. Her thoughts were interrupted by soft footsteps behind her. She turned to find the Heir standing there, his small figure silhouetted by the last light of day. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, yet carrying a weight that belied his age. "You look troubled." Sarah forced a smile, though it felt hollow. "I suppose I am," she admitted. "There's so much I still don't understand. I've never been part of something this important." The Heir stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "You are not alone in this," he said softly. "We are bound by fate, and that means we are stronger together. You are meant to be here, just as much as I am. The future of this kingdom is ours to shape." His words, simple as they were, held a weight that seemed to settle into her bones. Sarah had never been one to believe in fate, but standing here, with the Heir looking at her with such trust, it was hard to deny the connection that had been formed between them. It wasn't just about saving a child anymore. It was about a future, one that she would have a hand in shaping. The child's words rang in her ears, echoing through the silence of the balcony. "Together, we will change the future." It was a daunting thought, but for the first time since coming to the castle, Sarah didn't feel so alone. The Heir was right. They were bound by something greater than themselves, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silver light over the land, Sarah realized something. Her purpose was not just to protect the Heir. It was to stand by his side, to guide him, and to help him become the ruler he was meant to be. She had been given a second chance, a chance to prove that even an Omega could change the world. And as she stood beside the Heir, she knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be long and uncertain, but together, they could face whatever the future held. Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. And with that thought, she turned to the Heir, a newfound sense of purpose burning in her chest. "We'll face it together," she said, her voice steady. The Heir smiled, a small, knowing smile that spoke volumes. "Together," he agreed. And in that moment, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. As Sarah stood by the Heir's side in the quiet of the night, a sense of duty and purpose settled over her. The path that lay before her was daunting, but with each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger, more certain of the role she was meant to play. The days turned into weeks, and the relationship between Sarah and the Heir deepened, not just as protector and protected, but as partners in a journey that would define the future of the kingdom. Their time together was spent in quiet moments and deep conversations. Sarah learned more about the kingdom's history, its people, and the challenges it faced. She saw the weight of responsibility on the Heir's shoulders, and with each new lesson, her commitment to him and to their shared destiny grew. But despite the growing bond between them, Sarah knew that the challenges ahead would not be easily overcome. The kingdom was a delicate balance of power, and there were many who would not easily accept a new ruler, especially one so young. Sarah's role was becoming clearer with each passing day. She was not just a protector, but a guide, a steady hand in the face of uncertainty. She would help the Heir navigate the complex world of court politics, teaching him the ways of diplomacy and leadership. The Heir, though young, was intelligent and perceptive, and Sarah was amazed at how quickly he learned. He was not the child she had once thought him to be. He was already beginning to show signs of the leader he would become. One evening, as they sat together in the castle gardens, the Heir turned to Sarah, his gaze thoughtful. "Sarah," he began, his voice quiet, "I know that you've had doubts about your place here, about whether you truly belong. But I need you to understand something." Sarah looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. "What is it?" she asked. "You are more than just an Omega. You are the one who saved me, and you are the one who will help me lead. Together, we will ensure that the future of this kingdom is strong." His words struck a chord deep within her. She had never thought of herself as more than what she was labeled, an Omega, a lesser being in the eyes of many. But the heir's words were a reminder that her destiny was not defined by others' perceptions. She was part of something much larger. "I'm here for you," she said, her voice steady, "and I will do whatever it takes to help you lead this kingdom." The heir smiled, his expression softening. "Together, we will face every challenge, and we will rise above it all." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew that she was not walking it alone. With the heir by her side, they would face whatever the future held. Days turned into months, and Sarah's place in the kingdom became more secure. The heir's leadership was beginning to take shape, and the kingdom was slowly but surely moving toward a new era. There were still challenges to face, still enemies to overcome, but Sarah knew that they would face them together. The bond between her and the heir was unbreakable, and with that bond, they would change the future of the kingdom. Sarah had once believed that her life was defined by her past, by the labels others had placed upon her. But now, standing by the heir's side, she realized that she had the power to shape her own destiny. And with the heir, she would do just that. The weight of the days passed slowly, but Sarah found herself growing into her role beside the heir. It was a constant reminder that their bond was not just about destiny, it was about strength. As the heir's guidance grew firmer, so did Sarah's resolve. The kingdom, with all its politics, whispers, and shadowed alliances, was becoming a world she could navigate. They had their moments of peace, of reflection, but those moments were fleeting. Sarah knew they had to prepare for what was coming. One evening, as they sat in the royal library, the heir turned to Sarah, his eyes thoughtful. "The time is coming," he said, his voice laced with the weight of leadership. "The kingdom is on the brink of change. We have done all we can to prepare, but there are still those who would oppose us." Sarah looked at him, her mind running through the countless lessons she had learned since stepping into this new world. "I know," she replied softly, "but we are ready. We have each other. We have the strength to face what's to come." The heir smiled, a rare softness touching his features. "Together, we are more than just two individuals. We are a force that cannot be stopped." Sarah's heart swelled at his words. There was truth in them. She had seen it in the way the kingdom was slowly rallying behind them. There were whispers of change, of a new era. They were on the verge of something great, something that would shake the foundation of everything. But the road ahead would not be easy. As the heir grew into his role, so did the challenges they faced. There were still those in the kingdom who saw them as a threat. Powerful families, rival factions, and the old guard who resisted change. Sarah had seen the way some looked at her, at their bond, as though it was an affront to the very order they had built. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "We will face them," Sarah said, her voice steady, unwavering. "We will show them the strength of this kingdom, of what we can build together." The heir nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a newfound determination. "Together," he echoed. "We are stronger than any of them." The days turned into weeks, and the tension in the kingdom grew palpable. The court was a place of politics, where smiles masked daggers and alliances were as fragile as the wind. But Sarah had learned to read the room, to understand the undercurrents of power and influence. She was no longer just an outsider, an omega in a world that didn't understand her. She was part of something greater, something that would change everything. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the castle in a golden light, Sarah found herself in the courtyard with the heir. He stood there, gazing out at the kingdom they were destined to rule, his expression unreadable. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" Sarah asked, stepping beside him. The heir turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "I wonder what we can build," he said, his voice low but certain. "What we can create together. The kingdom will be ours, but it will be what we make of it. And I believe we will make it great." Sarah felt a surge of pride at his words. They had come so far, and there was so much more ahead of them. The challenges, the opposition, it was all part of the journey. But together, they would rise above it all. Together, they would lead the kingdom into a new era. "We will make it great," Sarah said, her voice filled with conviction. "And we will do it together." The heir smiled, his eyes shining with something fierce, something undeniable. "Together," he agreed. And in that moment, Sarah knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as one. They were no longer just two individuals. They were a united force, a bond that could not be broken. Together, they would change the future of the kingdom. The tension in the kingdom had reached a boiling point. Whispers of revolution and discontent had spread like wildfire, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Sarah stood beside the heir, her heart racing as they prepared for the next stage of their journey. The kingdom's future was no longer just a distant idea. It was something they were actively shaping, step by step. "They will come for us," the heir said quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Those who oppose us, those who fear what we represent. But we cannot back down. Not now." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but they had come too far to turn back. She had never imagined her life would be tied to something so monumental, but now, with the heir by her side, she felt a purpose she had never known before. "We won't back down," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "We will lead them, no matter the cost." As they walked through the castle's halls, Sarah could sense the growing unrest. The nobles, once confident in their positions, now looked over their shoulders, their eyes filled with uncertainty. They knew that the kingdom was changing, and not all of them were ready to embrace that change. But Sarah and the heir were not like them. They were the future, and they were ready to shape it. In the days that followed, Sarah continued to work beside the heir, learning more about the kingdom's intricacies. She attended meetings with the council, listening to their concerns and offering her insight. She was no longer just an Omega. She was a trusted advisor, a partner in shaping the kingdom's destiny. The heir's leadership grew stronger with each passing day, and Sarah could see the respect he commanded from those around him. He was not the child she had first met. He was becoming the ruler he was always meant to be. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony, the heir turned to Sarah, his expression serious. "The time is coming," he said, his voice low but firm. "We will face those who seek to tear us apart, but we will not let them." Sarah felt a surge of determination in her chest. The kingdom was at a crossroads, and she knew that the choices they made in the coming days would define everything. "We will stand together," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "We will face them, no matter what." The heir smiled, a small, knowing smile that filled Sarah with a sense of pride. Together, he agreed. The days that followed were filled with preparations. The heir and Sarah worked tirelessly, laying the groundwork for the changes they sought to implement. There were meetings with allies, negotiations with other factions, and careful strategies that needed to be put into place. But through it all, Sarah never wavered. She had found her place beside the heir, and together, they were unstoppable. As the kingdom's tension reached its peak, Sarah knew that the moment of truth was fast approaching. The heir would soon be tested, and the kingdom's future would be decided by the strength of their bond. But Sarah was ready. She had always been an outsider, a broken Omega, but now, she was part of something greater. She was part of a future that they would build together. And as they stood side by side, facing the unknown, Sarah knew one thing for certain. They would not be defeated. Together, they would change the world.